mystical world where tales of wonder and fear await. If you're captivated by the mysteries we uncover, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support means everything. Now, sit back, relax, and get ready.
It had been exactly 3 days since Sarpen had been called to the ship. He had spent these days in the engine room, completing final checks before their long voyage. Right after graduating, he started working as a machinist on cargo ships, choosing a completely different life far from the chaos of the city. Being at sea meant discovering it, and each journey he embarked on opened another door that fueled his hunger for exploration. On his last day on land, he boarded the ship to start his shift and headed straight to his cabin to unpack. This small room, which served as both his refuge and at times his prison during long voyages, carried the familiar scent of the sea, metal, and a bit of dampness typical of the ship. His eyes fell on the last few sips of whiskey left from his previous journey. He grabbed a dusty glass from the cupboard, gave it a quick rinse, and poured himself a drink. After taking a throat-burning sip, he randomly selected a book from the tightly packed single shelf of his library. These books, filled with stories of past sailors, were his trusted companions during lonely voyages. Lost in his book, an announcement echoed through the ship, and he made his way to the deck to join his crewmates. With a quiet nod of acknowledgement, the ship weighed anchor and began its 4-month journey. There would be a few stops where they could go ashore, but otherwise, they would remain at sea. On deck, that familiar feeling of being free from the burdens of land washed over him again. During his days on land, he had fallen in love with a woman and even considered giving up the sea. But here he was, back on the ship, in the same cabin. Soon, he would return to the engine room to ensure the ship's heart, the small, intricate machines, were working properly. His days were filled with silence, thoughts, patience, and the mechanical tasks he performed automatically. Weeks later, when they first reached land, the crew's first stop was a bar for some fun. They would be anchored at this port for about 10 days while the loading process was completed, giving Sarpen plenty of time to explore. One day, while wandering near the port in search of a place to drink, he met an old sailor. The man was busy chatting with a few of his peers in a shabby tavern. When he met Sarpen, memories of his youth came flooding back, and he invited him to join their table. As the drinks flowed, the conversation turned to women and love. The old sailor was alone, having spent most of his life at sea in search of something. Sarpen listened eagerly, as if uncovering a new mystery in the sailor's story. The sailor spoke of a creature he encountered in the dark depths of the sea, a being buried in the dusty pages of history. It was said to drive those who heard its call mad, leading ships toward jagged cliffs. Few had ever seen its face, and for some sailors, it was the embodiment of a curse. For others, it was the source of wisdom, love, desires, and happiness. The old sailor had spent his youth searching for it, and eventually, he found it. As he shared this story, he reached into his pocket with a sense of secrecy, as if retrieving something precious. He pulled out a small black pouch. Inside was a delicate, silvery chain. He placed it in Sarpen's hand, showing it as proof that he had once encountered one of these beings. It wasn't just an ordinary piece of jewelry. It was as heavy as the beer glass in his hand, as fluid as mercury, and as fine as a fishing line. It had been after much effort that the old sailor managed to catch her, snapping the silver chain hanging from her waist. This was crucial, as it prevented the mermaid from attacking him. Yet, even with the chain, he couldn't subdue the creature, and she eventually escaped his grasp. The old sailor tried to continue speaking, but his face twisted with a silent pain he couldn't put into words. He tucked the chain back into its pouch and returned it to his pocket. Sarpen was not just a romantic sailor who loved getting lost in such stories. He was also a skilled thief, who often struggled to control his desires and relied on the beginner's luck of his youth. Whether the tale was true or not, he wanted that piece of jewelry. So, as they said their goodbyes, he boldly slipped his hand into the man's jacket and took the pouch containing the chain. After all, stealing from a thief wasn't really a sin. When the ship set sail again, it was at least 3 weeks to the next port. Every evening, after dinner, Sarpen would retreat to a corner of the deck, studying the jewel he had stolen under the moonlight, sometimes illuminated by the stars and accompanied by the sea breeze. It was made of a material that looked like silver, but with a brightness akin to a crystal, unlike anything he had seen before. If this truly belonged to a mermaid, there was a chance he might encounter her. One night, as the ship passed through a narrow channel, alarms suddenly blared. The crew rushed about, trying to pinpoint the issue. Eventually, they realized there was a problem with the propeller and the ship began to slow down. Finally, it came to a halt. Initially, they tried to resolve it internally, but ultimately, a dive team had to be sent out. 3 men were lowered into the water to inspect the issue. When they returned, they reported finding a rope tangled in the propeller, but the job would need to wait until daylight to be completed. As the ship's propellers stopped, the vessel fell into a haunting silence, broken only by the whispers of the wind and the hum of the sea. And that was when Sarpen heard her voice for the first time. It wasn't a song, nor was it a human voice. It was more like a call, the cry of a being from the depths, reaching the surface. The feeling it evoked was impossible to describe. The crew was sound asleep, the deck was empty, and the sea below was a dark, endless expanse. Sarpen ran back and forth on the deck, trying to locate where the voice was coming from, but he couldn't see the creature. Finally, he decided to lower one of the lifeboats into the water to take a closer look. As he worked the ropes, unease crept in, but the old sailor's words echoed in his mind. If this really was the mermaid, she wouldn't harm him with the chain in his possession. If the sound belonged to some other creature, however, the lifeboat was hardly a safe place to be. Yet, he was enough of a dreamer to trust in the first possibility. Rowing through the dark waves, he heard the voice again. It seemed to be coming from the rocks ahead, as if echoing from a deep cave beneath the surface. He rowed closer, the sound fueling his deepest desires, turning into a call that tempted him. It was madness, of that much he was sure. When he finally grew tired and paused to rest, he suddenly felt a tail strike beneath the boat. Alarmed, he looked around, and through the surface of the water, he saw a fin slicing through the waves. Fear and anxiety pulled him back to reality, and he glanced toward the ship in the hopes of seeing someone, anyone. Just then, the boat took another hit, rocking violently, and in that moment, he felt her presence in front of him. Sitting before him was a magnificent creature, human-like in form. If she was a mermaid, her tail was no longer there, replaced by long, slender legs. Her skin was pale as snow, and her jet-black hair cascaded down from her chest to between her legs. Through the strands of her hair, the curves of her flawless body were visible, and her striking coral-colored lips resembled the hue of a poisonous fruit. Her expressionless face bore a menacing aura. When she spoke, it was as if she sound of both the water and the wind. She asked him if he had something that belonged to her. Instead of answering directly, Sarpen inquired why she was looking for it. She explained that it had belonged to her husband, and after he died, she was coming to reclaim it. So that was the secret that had been caught in the old sailor's throat. Somehow, through the chain, he had managed to bind this being to himself. The chain was like a vow of loyalty. However, judging by her appearance, which gave no clue to her age, it was clear that for this immortal being, a human lifespan meant nothing. He had a choice: either keep the chain, or return it and let her go. For the first time in his life, an ordinary sailor like him had come face to face with something so magnificent. Yet, he sensed that his bravery could lead him into danger, perhaps even to his death. Sarpen had to make a quick decision. He pulled the chain from his pocket and extended it to the mermaid. She was visibly surprised, her eyes full of suspicion as they lingered on the glowing chain in Sarpen's hand. Just as she reached out to take it, Sarpen swiftly pulled it back with a smile. He had done it. He had dared. "I've never encountered a miracle as beautiful as you," he said. "But I don't want to become like the man I stole this chain from. I can't live drowning in the illusion that I own you. I'll return this chain to you, but before I die, I want to see you again. Can you promise me that?" The mermaid smiled at his question and leaned toward him, locking her gaze with his. "Sailor, you won't be the first, nor the last man to be consumed by this desire. But because you've understood the truth, I'll forgive you. If you give me the chain, I promise, when the time comes, I will find you again." Though Sarpen didn't fully grasp what she meant by "when the time comes," he handed the chain back to her. The mermaid took it, and with a swift, instinctive leap, dove back into the water. In an instant, her legs transformed into a massive, silvery tail, and she disappeared into the dark waves with a few graceful splashes. For a brief moment, Sarpen froze, wondering if he had lost his mind. He stared at the spot where the supernatural creature had vanished, doubting her reality. But then, he felt something solid in his palm. It was a smooth seashell, covered in mother-of-pearl, gleaming under the moonlight. Its small weight and the memories it stirred brought Sarpen a sense of joy. This would be his secret, one he would carry with him until they met again. Years passed. Sarpen sailed the seas of the world, always with the seashell hanging around his neck. Even though he traveled as a man who had given his heart to the sea, his eyes never stopped searching for the mermaid between the waves. Eventually, when he realized that his voyages had become a relentless pursuit, he retired and married. He never fell in love, but he built a home with a kind, beautiful woman and had a child. Though he no longer sailed, every morning, he took his small boat out to fish at the shore. Time wore down his memories, but he never once removed the seashell from around his neck. As he grew older and was no longer able to venture out to sea, a deep emptiness formed in his heart. To fill this void, he spent time with his family and his grandchildren. He got to know his wife anew, taught his grandson how to steer a boat, and one day, shared the secret of the seashell with him. When old age finally weighed too heavily on him and he was confined to a wheelchair, life became difficult to bear. It was then that, for the first time, he felt a call in his heart. He had to return to the sea. One last time, he needed to sail among the waves. One autumn evening, Sarpen asked his grandson to take him out on his boat at sunset. With the excitement of a mischievous child, he secretly filled his old steel flask with whiskey, and after a joyful dinner with his children, he eagerly made his way back to his boat. That day, he felt a surge of life again. As they set out to sea, Sarpen made his way to the seat at the front of the boat and took a sip from his flask, which he had hidden in his inner pocket. His eyes welled up with joy. He breathed in the salty air and looked at the waves glistening under the colors of the sunset. He listened to the wind and the sound of the water. His grandson, sensing that Sarpen wanted to be left alone, stayed quietly at the helm. After a while, as the sun sank halfway below the horizon, Sarpen noticed something gleaming among the waves. As they drew closer, he realized it was a tail, gliding effortlessly in and out of the water, making long leaps as it moved toward the boat. So, the time had finally come. He called out to his grandson, telling him he was cold and asked him to fetch a blanket from the cabin. As soon as his grandson left, Sarpen sensed her presence. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw the flawless, marble-like face of the mermaid. Her smile, unchanged, was now bathed in the light of sunset. Beneath her human-like appearance, there was an ethereal power that shimmered, almost like a light so intense it could melt her skin. Her eyes, shifting with the hues of the sea, resembled molten gemstones. "Are you ready to leave, sailor?" she asked, her gaze steady. Sarpen nodded with joy. The mermaid rose to her full height, and for the first time, Sarpen realized just how tall she was. Without wasting any time or exerting much effort, she lifted the sailor into her arms and made her way to the bow of the boat. Sarpen understood that he had reached the end of the reality he once knew. But as he gazed into the dark depths of the sea, he felt a fleeting stir of primal human fear. "Am I going to die?" he asked. Smiling, the mermaid replied, "On the contrary, I've come to take you somewhere else." With that, she leaped into the cool waters, carrying Sarpen with her into the unknown depths.